Hello everyone, my name is Danny Braun, and today we're going to be talking about ADHD. More specifically, we're going to be looking into how ADHD medications affect the individual, both on a positive and a negative level. First, let's talk about structure. The ADHD brain is actually smaller than the neurotypical brain, both overall and in specific areas like the amygdala, hippocampus, limbic system, and prefrontal cortex. These different parts of the brain control functions like executive functions, emotional processing, and impulsivity. So you can see how a smaller brain can be affected by this. ADHD brains also have decreased blood flow to these aforementioned areas of the brain. This does not affect intelligence, however. There's an ongoing debate in the scientific community about the correlation between ADHD and intelligence. People with ADHD are more likely to score lower on an IQ test, but score higher on tests that measure creativity. Scientists also found that the ADHD brain matures slower than the neurotypical brain by about 2 years. They also found that the ADHD brain never reaches the peak maturity levels of a neurotypical brain. Now, it's important to clear up that when we're talking about maturity, we're not necessarily talking about emotional maturity, but the maturity of the brain itself, the thickness of the cortical lining. One study even found that children with ADHD have different connections between the frontal cortex and the visual processing area. This indicates that the ADHD processes information in a different way than the non-ADHD brain on a fundamental level. So now that we've talked about the structure of the ADHD brain, let's talk a little bit about the chemistry behind it. ADHD at its core is a dysregulation of the dopamine system, which is also called the noradrenaline system. You can recognize the word adrenaline in there. That'll come in handy later. This is the reward system, which controls things like impulsivity, attentional accuracy, and response control. That is why people with ADHD are more likely to struggle with impulsivity, have less attentional accuracy, and have less response control, because the system itself is dysregulated. So when I say dysregulation, what exactly do I mean? Let's take a closer look. So here we have the signaling between two different neurons. We have dopamine here as our neurotransmitter, but this applies to any neurotransmitter. First, the action potential from the axon comes down and depolarizes the presynaptic membrane. This signals these calcium channels to open up, and calcium swarms into the membrane. This causes the synaptic vesicles to form with the membrane and release these neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. Now, these neurotransmitters can be picked up by receptors on the receiving dendrite, and the signal is then complete. What happens to the rest of these neurotransmitters is that they are reuptaken by a reuptake protein for future use. The dysregulation in the ADHD brain can come when there's not enough dopamine neurotransmitters available, when there's not enough receptors available for the dopamine, or when it's not used efficiently. So let's talk about the ways to treat ADHD. By far, the most common way to treat ADHD is with stimulants. Non-stimulants are only used if stimulants do not work, and that is very rare. Stimulants can come in many forms, such as Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta, or Vyvanse, among many others. I'm choosing to focus on Adderall, but all these stimulants function very similarly. The active component in Adderall is amphetamine salts. Amphetamine salts focus to block the reuptake of dopamine and increase the uptake of dopamine in subsequent neurons. Let's take those two parts separately. First, Adderall blocks the reuptake of dopamine. Stimulants like Adderall use a reuptake inhibitor to block the reuptake protein, which in turn blocks dopamine from being reuptaken into the presynaptic membrane. What this does is causes more dopamine to fixate in the synaptic cleft and more dopamine to be taken up by receptors. Adderall also increases the uptake itself of dopamine into its receptors, and both of these combine to fix the dopamine system. What's very important to note about these stimulants is that they activate the sympathetic nervous system, otherwise known as your fight or flight response. This can lead to things like increased heartbeat, decreased digestion, and increased adrenaline and other stress hormones. This is where the side effects of stimulants like Adderall comes from. The increased heartbeat leads to an increased or irregular heartbeat and increased blood pressure. The decreased digestion can lead to a loss of appetite, which can then lead to weight loss. The increase in adrenaline and stress hormones can lead to insomnia, and probably the most important side effect of all, it can lead to addiction because these hormones generate a high feeling. Differences between stimulants can arise from a variety of factors, the most important of which is probably dosage. Different stimulants require a different dosage to have the same or similar effects. The same dosage of Adderall is going to have a very different effect from the same dosage of Ritalin, which is why they need to vary. Another important difference in medication is in the formulation. The most common way to ingest a medication is through capsules, but liquids and patches on the skin are also used. These different formulations can affect the release mechanism, or the time it takes for a medication to take effect on the body. The release mechanism also refers to the amount of time that a medication is active or has an effect on the individual. Some medications last for only a couple hours, while other medications can last for up to 12 hours. Ultimately, the best ADHD medication relies on a number of factors like your history, your genetic profile, and your metabolism. The different stimulants, dosages, formulations, and release mechanisms are variable so that each individual can have the best treatment possible. Before I end this video, I want to mention a new on-the-rise treatment for ADHD, which is still very controversial. This is called TMS, and the reason it's controversial is because not enough research has been done to approve its clinical use in ADHD. However, it shows promising results. TMS is administered by taping electrical coils to the subject's head and administering brief, intense magnetic pulses into the brain. This is used to combat the same dysregulation of the dopamine system as stimulants. It is found to be more permanent than these stimulants. However, it comes at the small risk of seizures, and like I mentioned before, not enough research has been done on it to approve it for clinical use. I hope this video has helped you gain an understanding of ADHD, its treatments, and the positive and negative effects of those treatments on the individual. Have a great day!